Perfect. So, hi everyone, and welcome to our first meet and greet of 2025. My name is Andrea Sangil, for those who don't know me. And I'm really excited to have different speakers today, and also all of you, to talk a little bit more about the economics of popular transport. If you haven't been in a meet and greet before, meet and greets are an informal setting where we can talk about the different topics that we are working on in the popular transport sector and connect with people in our network. I think especially in times like this one where there's a lot of... Gara, can you mute? Sorry. In times like these where the world is going through a lot of very tumultuous situations, we need to build community and we need to learn from each other and reduce the learning curves and have others that we can ask for advice and help and share experiences. So these meet and greets are looking for that, to build community, and that we can know more people from our network, know more people who are passionate as we are of popular transport and about improving livelihoods and improving quality of life, reducing emissions, etc. So in this first meet and greet, we're going to be talking about the economics of popular transport. A lot of the times when we talk about popular transport and about economics, people think about the business models and optimizing the numbers and all of money part in terms of the business of popular transport. But today we're going to try to expand that notion and think about how does popular transport, for example, contribute to livelihoods, not only of the people who are drivers or operators, but also of the people who use popular transport, people who have businesses around that, markets, etc. We can think about also how the business models and the way we are planning to change or improve popular transport might impact livelihoods as well, how popular transport contributes to the wider city economy, etc. So we're going to try to expand the notion of the economics of this sector. And today we have amazing speakers like Alana, Nico, and the Spark team, and Neruda, Alex, and the rest of the Spark team. And we always, in the meet and greets, we have a space at the end where we can also exchange, because I know a lot of you here have a lot of experience on this topic as well. A lot of you are helping popular transport operators electrify, others are supporting in improving and optimizing the business models and including technology. So we have a lot to learn about this topic from you as well. So the idea is to have an open discussion at the end. I just wanted to share my screen for a second to show you two things that are important today. And can someone please confirm if you are seeing my screen right now?
You see
it's
it
loading, it
live,
says.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I'm just trying to move to presentation mode for a second. Sorry. Yes. So first of all, I wanted to share with you that this year we have different meet and greets throughout the year. This first one is the economics one, but we will be having conversations about safety, security, integration of technology in popular transport, climate action, users' needs and motivations, and also beyond passenger transports, what are other areas in which popular transport is essential. And we are partnering with the Partnership for Research on Informal and Shared Mobility. Jackie will tell us a bit more about PRISM. And Volvo, VREF, Volvo Research and Educational Foundations, is our main funding partner for this work. But we're going to be working with other experts in the field beyond the PRISM consortium. And so also, if you are working in any of these topics and would like to share your work and your research, please let us know. We're always looking for speakers, and we're always looking for new work, new initiatives, innovations coming in the field, so we can learn about them and share with our network. And the second piece of news that we have is that today we are launching a series of documents, and we're calling them explainers, on 2 and 3 wheelers. The first one we are talking about today is the explainer on the economics of 2 and 3 wheelers that was developed by the Spark team in India, who are part of the PRISM Research Consortium. And these explainers are supported by Uber. So we have developed 5 explainers on economics, safety and security, road safety, electrification, and equity and inclusion. Here you can download the explainer for the economics of 2 and 3 wheelers. And if you go to our webpage, you will be able to find all the other explainers starting from today. So I just wanted to share this with you so you can take a look at the document, download it for starting today, and have some context on what we're talking about today. And with this, I'll turn it over to Jackie to say hi and tell us a bit about the PRISM Consortium and how it connects to the meet and greets.
Thanks, Andrea. As always, the work that Global Network for Popular Transport does is very inspiring and unique. Always wonderful to hear about all the different work you're doing. So I'll be quick, but I'm Jackie Klopp, and I'm at the Center for Sustainable Urban Development at Columbia's Climate School here in New York City. I have the privilege of being part of the Partnership for Research on Informal and Shared Mobility, which is a open consortium. Anyone can join us, but at the core has both GNPT, the World Resource Institute, and 7 amazing living labs across the Global South. So we have today one of those living labs that is doing really exciting work from Mumbai. And these living labs are trying to take really a much more engaged approach to research, recognizing that a lot of what we need to understand about these systems of informal and shared mobility, or sometimes popular transport, and we can talk about why I like that term and Andrea likes that term, why we need to take these more engaged approaches to actually get a deeper understanding of a lot of the critical issues in these systems. So I'm not going to take up more of our precious time for that. I'd love to turn it back to the conversation today. But I would say one thing that's emerging out of the living labs are a series of really critical gaps in our understanding of these systems and the communities and people who rely on them and make them work, and therefore make cities work in much of the Global South. And one of the big gaps is really the economics of how these systems work. And not, as Andrea says, just like what are the business models? No, it's about what are all the economic impacts, the livelihoods, the labor, that, and what does that look like for these systems? And that's so important for thinking about how to improve them, and the most important, the people who use them and the people who make them run. So with that, I'll put more information about PRISM into the chat. I welcome everyone. Please send us an email if you'd like to stay in our network. I'd also like to recognize Jane Somerton, who's here from Volvo Research and Education Foundations, a very visionary foundation, honestly, that is supporting all this work. So Andrew, if you don't mind, I don't know, Jane, if you just want to say a word or two, and then I'll pass it on.
Of course, Jane.
Thanks very much, Jackie, and also Andrea. I'll be very short. I'm very happy to be here, and VRF is really excited about the ongoing work at all the living labs, and so I'm really looking forward to learning a lot from you today. Thanks.
Thanks, Jane. Okay, then with that, I think we can start the discussion, and I'll let the Spark team take the lead and show us a bit about the work that they do and the insights from the economics explainer.
Thank you, Andrea. Just a brief introduction, because this presentation is going to be made by Alex and Shreya. So first of all, I'm Anirudh Paul from Mumbai. Good evening to all. Generally, I'm an academician, as well as I work as a technical advisor for Spark. So a little bit about Spark. Spark is an organization, a non-governmental organization, which works a lot with vulnerable communities, especially informality in India, and trying to address their vulnerabilities, trying to provide resources in water, sanitation, housing, and also we are looking at aspects of climate change among these vulnerable communities. That's just a short introduction of Spark. And the research now that we have done, the explainer, especially the work we have done, is primarily through secondary sources and also through the work that we are involved within the PRISM network. So a lot of it also is our experiences that we have got from site. So with that, we will share both secondary sources as well as experiences from the site. With that, I call in Alex and Shia. Are you all there? Alex?
Yeah, we are here.
Okay, fine. You can open the camera.
So we have shared the screen.
Yeah,
Okay.
Alex, you can start.
Yeah.
1 second.
Yeah, I'm trying to share the screen again. Just a second. All right. So we're part of the Spark team, as Aniruddha introduced. So I'm Alex.
And I'm Shreya.
Okay. And so this explainer, we were trying to talk about the economics of 2- and 3-wheeler popular transport. When we started with the paper, what we observed was there's there's a huge gap and literature gap, especially around labor and livelihood, looking at the economic situation of the of the auto drivers and the transport workers involved in the last mile connectivity. And so in 2- and 3-wheeler transport, what we observed was how it provides millions of people access to mobility without relying on private vehicles, and how for passengers it becomes typically to stop at stations to shop before continuing to their destinations, and how this creates a system of livelihoods that includes drivers, food vendors, hawkers, waste pickers, mechanics, scrap dealers, and many others. And over here, what we are trying to show through the graph is also in Narasupara, where we tried to map the number of trips which grows towards the evening period from the terminal point, like from the formal railway station point, how you observe the number of trips increasing through the period of the day.
So here, what happens is like this was specifically done towards the origin point as the station and then the neighborhoods. So you can see it gradually increasing because of the number of commuters that come back from the city to come back to their neighborhoods, and you can see the spike in the number of trips in certain areas that takes place in the graph. And going to the next, we're talking about so one of the great trends that are taking place in the 2- and 3-wheelers are the job creation and the economic impact all over the global south. So we know how 2- and 3-wheelers play a great role in the entire global south, and how much we are really dependent on them and as our last mile connectivity. But you can also see there is a lot of employment other than the drivers that also rely on these transport, especially if we can see the examples that we've given on the screen, that is India, Uganda, and Dhaka, and there are many more.
this was the data that we were able to bring in, and we have more on the papers too. But like there are many more that where the number of laborers that are laborers, vendors, and mechanics that also are dependent on our paratransit and our 2 and 3 wheelers.
So over here in the next, one of the key trends which we observed was how these nodes become transport hubs and a thriving point for the local businesses. The image which you see, the map which we have tried to represent the terminal point, the Nalasopara station, and where there is more than 216,000 people every day footfall which we experience. And as you see, there's like auto rickshaws and vendors, and from different forms of vendor, from food vendors, there are fruits and vegetables and clothing, and so how that whole system plays out, and how it provides business for a huge number of people at these nodes.
And again, this is just a case, this is like our case study that we have studied in Nalasopara. This is the study that we have done. But again, this is again a global south phenomena where you can, again, in the examples we've given on Philippines, where they do like almost 1,000 to 3,000 vendors also rely on the footfall traffic from the paratransit, from the public transit users. So this is not specific to India. This is also there all over, and we are trying to look into those areas too.
And especially during the interviews also, I remember the auto drivers especially mentioning how important are these vendors around them and how much it contributes to their businesses also, and vice versa.
So the next trends are, of course, the digital platforms that are uprising all over India, and all over global south. We have one of our co-living labs are also talking about digital platforms and how they can improve their paratransit. But again, for 2 and 3 wheelers, this has been a game changer where there was efficiency, there was fair transparency and convenient for customers, especially for the women, where as women drivers and women riders, they find it safer and more convenient to use ride-hailing apps as a form than like the conventional system. So these platforms provide transparency for the drivers and provide transparency to the riders too. And like the examples in Tugande of East Africa, we have Olas, we have something called Rapido, and in all other places like in Philippines we have Philippines and Indonesia, we have Ojek, etc. So all of them provide these similar types of facilities, which kind of helps the drivers and the riders.
For example, like how she said in Uganda, the own your own Boda program was launched, where it enabled the drivers to work towards ownership by building a digital credit profile. Sorry. So where it helped them to build a digital credit profile from their daily earnings to ease the filling of like the credit gap. Now, when we look into challenges, one of the major challenges which we've seen is lack of government support, especially in Nalasopara, where it being one of the peripheral areas, growing hub for mostly working class people, a large amount of like the investment is like you don't see public infrastructure funded by the government. There is a huge amount of ground bottoms up where people themselves are coming up, and especially in informal transport, you see where the waiting zones and the waiting areas and resting points, mostly designed by the people itself, wherever the most footfall is seen around the station areas. And there is again in the case of Nalasopara, we have seen how the change in permit system had suddenly increased the number of autos, leading to competition among people. So there is like the sudden spike in through the interviews also we understood how in the last 10 years a sudden spike of autos have resulted in competition between auto drivers, leading to very less amount of income through the day.
And the next thing that they majorly have a problem in is accessing finances and accessing loans for their purchase of their vehicles. Again, this is the examples we have given here are specific to Nalasopara in India, where like we can see in the in like lot of we can see in the pie chart where like almost around 40% of their entire income goes into their auto expenditure, which also majorly includes on their loans and their debts that they need to pay up for. And for that, like we have banks and private banks which provide loans, but they're for the drivers itself, these are like very high rate of interests with like lot of documents required, which major of them don't have. They don't have maybe a proof of income. They come from migrated areas or cities to work here as auto drivers, and they don't have such documents. And this results them to either fall upon money lenders who don't take in all of these documents which are actually necessary for the roads. And this results in like putting them in financial debts. These people can rip them off. They can take away their money and increase their rate of interest anytime and any point of day. So there is no format of it, and there is and this requires them to finally surrender the vehicle or like have or go into bankruptcy where they can't even afford to buy food for home. So this system is actually this is where they kind of have a lot of problem. And because major of our auto drivers are like many of them are illiterate, and many of them are like less educated, they do fall under these sort of traps where they kind of get into. And next is the job security and the worker rights. So like Alex mentioned, because of now if you compare them with formal transport workers, like they have labor laws impacted on them. They have fixed wages. They have like regulated working hours. They have health insurances, unemployment benefits, and pension schemes. But this kind of a system is not there for the two and three wheelers all around. Again, this is specific to India, but again, we are saying that these are in the same lines. These majority of the two and three wheelers fall under. And in the case of Nalasopara, like again, as Alex mentioned, there was a spike in the permits and irregulated permits, which increased the number of autos, which increased the number of hours that they had to wait after every single trip, which would result to almost 2.5 hours just of waiting so that they can come forward and collect passengers, which again led to like illegal driving and irregulated auto drivers who would come into their stands and like pick up customers and go away and reduce their passengers. So this is like a complex system which kind of keeps building up, and these are the challenges that they face every single day. And these are hours not only not in comfortable conditions at all. They have to wait these hours in like heavy rains, in hot heat, in high peaks of like climate changes and everything. So they will be driving through floods. They will be driving in peak heat, but like they will have to do it because that is what they rely on.
So as form of policy solutions, one of the solutions which we thought would definitely be a better form of a regulation and integration into the formal form of a system. So, and we over here we're showing one of the example where in Bangkok that how the intervention of government to in providing jackets, in providing in the parking space, automatically reduced their income, automatically increased the income 67%. Like how similarly you see that a support from the government definitely gives uh, uh, definitely helps the drivers and the transport workers to uh, save up money for their family, save up money for their health, for education. Like, so how in any form of support in terms of parking, in terms of schemes where pension, how a formalizing from the government helps in a better form of working condition for these workers. And the next one which we saw was where we could professionalize the popular transport sector and how providing legal advice and support to the drivers so they know how to lawfully operate these businesses, and how probably a census of popular transport operators to better understand the sector scale. This will help in improving the data regarding the type of vehicle, their age, their workforce, uh, and how it can enhance the planning and policy making. Yeah, and especially in access to finance, how a low interest loan will definitely be from the government, from would enable them to reduce the load which comes on them because of also uh, 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 like having a better form of a financial institution to help them, which is again tailored to their format of riding, format of their livelihood.
So again, this was again an example in Bangkok where they had proposed a terminal station for their motorcycle taxis. Now, these kind of interventions in the cities and small architectural interventions within the cities can help the drivers and the passengers to move in and have especially for the drivers, they have like a resting space, they have like a parking area, they have spaces provided to like stand, an organized way for passengers to come in and board the vehicles and move out. So these sort of interventions, infrastructural interventions can actually provide a high, them a lot of comfort and a lot of safety, especially for customers and drivers themselves. So finally, we are coming to a conclusion. Like these were the main three trends and the four challenges that we had put up on the papers. And but like finally, we are telling that again, 2 and 3 wheelers are like the most important mobility within the global south, at least in Asia and in India specifically. And of course, with the growing trend of digital technology and data-driven information can help this particular paratransit to actually thrive, because this gives us real-time information, and it will give the drivers better trip movement. They can calculate trips, they can go beyond their specific areas and etc. And then, of course, government financial institutions and recognizing them as a transportation and giving them certain benefits will increase their lives and livelihoods for for the coming future. And also because a lot of these street vendors and other transport related people who are dependent on this, once this starts getting what do you say, there is some sort of a regulation, everyone starts getting benefited, everyone makes profits, and everyone thrives out of it. So we come to the end of our presentation, putting out these paper, and we hope you can get a chance to read it from the GNPT website. And yeah, we're open to questions now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alex and Shreya and Neruda as well. This was amazing work. I think I forgot to give some context about the explainers themselves. These explainers that we are working on and that the Spark team helped us develop specifically for the economics part, essentially what we look to do is change the narratives around 2- and 3-wheelers, which are essential transport in so many places around the world. And we're seeing that cities continue to ban them and to restrict their accessibility and to displace them from certain areas where they're providing services. So that's why we think it's really important to provide more data, more narratives, more stories about how they contribute to the economy of the city, the livelihoods, other types of businesses, access to opportunities, to jobs, to employment, etc., and how we can do this. So thank you so much for the policy recommendations as well. I will ask the crowd to keep the questions because we're going to have a big discussion space at the end. So I will actually segue to Alana. We're going to be learning beyond the 2- and 3-wheelers about other types of popular transport in other places around the world, and the element of labor, which is a big part of the economics of this sector. So Alana, feel free to introduce yourself and the work that you're going to present.
Hi, everyone. And it was really great to have that case study from Mumbai, because a lot of what I'm going to say actually really reinforces some of the work that's been done on 2- and 3-wheelers. So just to introduce myself, I'm the Director of Urban Transport at the International Transport Workers Federation. So for those of you who haven't, don't know about us or haven't had a relationship with us, we're an international organization of trade unions in transport. At the moment, we have over 700 unions from different countries around the world affiliated, representing about 18 million workers, including many from the countries that many of you are from. So India, South Africa, yeah, all over the global south, as well as North America and Europe. And it's interesting for us because our affiliated unions are a real mix of formal workers and informal workers. So it's the kind of full range, they reflect the full range of different employment relationships in different sectors of transport. So what I want to share today, and I know some of you were in the webinar yesterday, is some of what we're learning about working conditions and livelihoods in informal transport through a methodology that we've developed called labor impact assessments. And I don't want to take a lot of time today, so I'll only describe the methodology very briefly. I'm also afterwards going to put a link to the report that we launched yesterday, which gives a much more in-depth account of the methodology. But just before I start, I want to, really thank Andrea for recognizing the importance in all of the work that we do of addressing the question of employment and livelihoods. Because when we talk about the economics of popular transport, underpinning it is a model of employment which is based on extremely exploitative and precarious work. And the findings of our impact assessment really reinforce that. So, oh, sorry, my slides are not changing. Just give me one moment. Okay, there we are. A bit of panic there. So we've done about 6 of these, and when I say we, I'll explain that. 6 labor impact assessments. They were commissioned for an organization called the Global Labour Institute. In 3 of these cases, of these country cases, Nairobi, Dakar, and Abidjan, those cities, the ITF commissioned them directly, and the other 3 reports were commissioned by other agencies, but using a very similar methodology. And then the report that we launched yesterday, and which I'll give you the link to, is a real synthesis of all the findings from these 6 reports that the Volvo Foundation funded, and was very keen to look at what the international relevance and application of these findings would be in the context of public transport reform, particularly in the global south. So just very quickly, in terms of what the methodology is, this is it's a very participatory methodology. It's based on doing surveys, focus groups, in-depth interviews with informal transport workers themselves. And what we found, because trade unions and workers' associations were involved from the very beginning, that it was much more likely that we got accurate and honest information from workers who trusted the organizations that represented them, and were less reluctant than they would be if it was outside academics or consultants. But having said that, we worked in each of these cities in very close partnership with local universities who were very involved in collecting the data and helping us do the analysis. So it does have that kind of rigor. So what I want to share now quickly is just some of the findings, which I feel really reinforces some of what our colleagues were saying from Mumbai. The first one being that in the workforce, there are many different occupations. There are tens of thousands of people who rely on the provision of informal transport for their livelihoods, not just drivers and owners. And why I emphasize that is that often it's the workers in these other occupational groups that are overlooked when, you know, formal public transport's introduced or there's some kind of reform and what impact it has on them. They are also often excluded from surveys that transport authorities might conduct. I think what this did, and just in terms of our discussion about the economics of popular transport, is it really challenges the categorization of the workforce under the general title of operators. It is not a homogeneous group when we talk about the workforce. We came across high levels of socioeconomic differentiation within the workforce, which means that there are different experiences and priorities for workers and owners. And I think that's very important when we look at integration into formal public transport. The next area that I just wanted to highlight, because it really underpins the overall economic model, is that it's driven by the so-called target system, within which the majority of the drivers in informal transport are informally employed by the owners. What this means is that the drivers pay a daily or weekly fee to the vehicle owners, and then their earnings come from whatever is left after subtracting the target fee, as well as other expenses that a driver would have. For example, petrol or maintenance of the vehicle. And you'll see in the report, when you get a chance to read it, what this means for the very meager wages that workers earn. It also has serious negative impact for drivers and for passengers, because with drivers, it incentivizes them to work very long hours and to drive aggressively and dangerously in order to meet their daily target. So again, looking at the economics of the popular transport model, I would say that this is one of the biggest systemic problems underpinning the model of employment in informal transport. And then just very quickly, because this also, reinforces some of what was said earlier, we had through the labor impact assessments, a very concrete idea of the types of problems that the workforce faces within the current business model. And just very briefly, police harassment, very insecure and precarious work, no access to any legal rights. The majority of workers don't even have a contract of employment, little or no social protection, extremely long working hours, a poor working environment without access to shelter, to water, to toilet facilities, lack of respect from both the authorities, other institutions and passengers, and high levels of crime. So I just want to highlight as well, in terms of what we found out about women's employment in informal transport, that you find, I suppose unsurprisingly, that women are excluded from those occupations in informal transport, which are more secure, which tend to be dominated by men. And there are also very strong cultural barriers to women in the industry who face a lot of hostility. In terms of some of the workers' problems that I spoke about, some of those have a disproportionate impact on women. So the lack of social protection, which means there are no maternity rights. The lack of, sanitation means there are particular health and safety implications for women. So those have disproportionate negative impacts on women workers. And then very widespread sexual harassment and violence, with a lot of the people we interviewed saying that they have no choice but to put up with that, because otherwise there's no way of keeping their job. I'll talk about this only very briefly, but I know in the previous presentation you were emphasizing looking at the integration into formal public transport, which we completely agree with. But it's interesting where that is happening. There is often a lot of opposition and negative feelings about it. Most surprisingly, in the case of bus rapid transit, there was a big fear about job losses. Also, lots of criticism that there wasn't effective consultation. There was a lack of, respect for the experience and knowledge of informal workers. And there's generally a suspicion that when formal public transport's introduced, it's a way of driving the poor off the street. So I think there's a lot that we have to do in terms of, what formalization looks like and how informal workers see themselves as an integral part of that. And this is interesting when we talk about, the economics of popular transport, because the majority of workers that were interviewed find it very difficult to envisage a public transport system that operates under a different business model to the current, cash-based fill and run system. So there were a lot of workers that were very negative about the idea of scheduled services, fearing that it would lead to a decline in work and income. And many believe that the reorganization of the system into operating companies would favor some workers and not others, and it would depend on who you have family relationships with or who's known. And then interestingly as well, quite a lot of opposition to going cashless and using, automated ticketing, worried about that passengers would defraud them, or they wouldn't have cash to cover police bribes and other daily expenses. There was a lot of interest in fleet modernization and driving less polluting vehicles, but with a very strong kind of opinion that governments or authorities should be paying for new vehicles. So just very quickly, I'm not going to go through this in detail at all, just what we are proposing in terms of policy solutions. The absolute need to build the trust and respect between authorities and workers' organizations, particularly if there's going to be this integration, because at the moment there's a lot of suspicion that governments do not have the capacity to implement public transport reform projects. The importance of the capacity building in order to be able to do this, not just for the workers' organizations, but also for transport authorities to really understand the informal transport microeconomy. I thought this was interesting, how to address the immediate concerns of informal transport workers. This was a quote from a worker saying, why wait for BRT? In other words, formal transport. Why can't the government deal with the Matatu issues now? And, we've got a number of proposals, which you'll see in the report, related to alternatives to the target system, gender discrimination, access to vocational training, how to deal with harassment and corruption by the police, improving working conditions. And working conditions is an interesting one, because I think where there's an interface between formal and informal public transport, there's a real opportunity for the facilities of formal public transport to also benefit informal transport workers. And then access to social protection and affordable capital and access to loans, like we heard from the previous presentation. And then just very lastly, I want to end with this, which is the importance of not just adding this on when there's public transport reform, or for these processes like the work that we all doing to be happening in parallel. They should really, employment issues, livelihoods needs to be mainstreamed into how public transport reform is envisaged, is conceptualized, is planned, is implemented. And we went further and said it should be a condition for the financing that governments receive from international financial institutions. Thanks, Andreas. I hope that was a real snapshot of this quite in-depth report, and I'll put the link into the chat now.
Thanks so much, Alana. And I think this presentation really complemented the previous one. I think in the previous one, we heard a lot about integration, the infrastructure, professionalization, and I think with this, we get an insight of all of these processes are important, but we really need to understand what the workforce looks like, what their reality is, what their conditions are. So an integration process or a professionalization process will actually cater to their needs. There's many moments where the negotiations will only happen with maybe the owners, but they are not aware of the realities and the needs of the workers. And so we really need to do data-based decision making and to have these insights of what the workforce looks like and how the business models might impact them. And I really like the why wait for BRT. I think that is one of the messages that we've been pushing in a lot of the discussions we've been having internationally. That is, there's so many places where governments are not making any changes because they're waiting for a big project, a big BRT, and there's funders that will only fund this type of work, but popular transport is everywhere, and not every city can have a BRT, and popular transport is working right now. And so if we want to improve people's livelihoods, if we want to improve the local economy, the economy of this sector and the city itself, then we could start now if we really want to. So thanks again to both for your amazing presentations, and I will hand it over to Nico to help us do a wrap up and a reflection of the insights, also based on his background, which he's done amazing work on all the economics of popular transport. So he will give us some more insights on this, and then we will have an open discussion. So if you have any questions or comments or any insights from your work, please also join into the conversation after Nico kicks us off. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Andrea. Good afternoon from my side. Good afternoon from sunny Cape Town with a sunny setting on a beautiful summer's afternoon. And good morning and good evening to colleagues to the east of me. Perhaps just a very, very quick disclosure up front, Andrea. Alana, when you put your screen up with the reports, I think I've had a hand in different capacities, wearing different hats in at least 3 of the most recent studies. So just for the benefit of the meeting, in what we do, I don't go anywhere without actually making sure that we commission one of the studies that you've seen here. It's become such an important part, rich text of the discussion of the findings, of understanding the current state and talking to those in power about the need of the nature of the change. So, Andrea, I'm going to try and be very brief because I tend to sort of drift off and, ramble on. I made 3 observations across the 2 presentations that we saw. I'm going to share those quickly, and then I have 2 or 3 questions I'd like to throw in to get the conversation going. But please also, from the presenters, responses to these observations. My first observation deals with what I call, noted here, the centrality of the informal transport sector in the informal economies of the cities of the Global South. In both presentations, the takeaway for me is center to informal economy is informal transport. This is a major generator of cash, and a lot happens around the energy that is generated by the informal transport in our cities. So, of course, there's a question looming there. What do we do with all of that energy? What do we do with the central position that the informal sector, transport sector, occupies in the larger informal economy? How do we leverage? That's the question we're going to come to. The second observation I made, and this is very stark from the first presentation and from the second presentation, is the need for, and I think the term was used, formal recognition of what I put here, the place and role of the informal transport sector in, to use transport language, a multimodal system, but also the place at the table, which has got to do with access to power, access to influencing and informing decision-making. So I think from that first observation, this is a sector that is so central to everything that constitutes the informal economy. Why is this sector not granted the space to engage? And I think that's a critical observation for me, both in terms of the place and role in we spoke about first and last mile, etc., on the 2- and 3-wheelers, but even that is not formally recognized. And then together with recognition, in fact, I had the 2 comments linked and then I separated them, the need for inclusion. So I think following on recognition, is the need for inclusion, a very central theme, and inclusion in both transport planning, regulatory reforms pertaining to transport, but also inclusion in access to financing, for instance. And then finally, I think very important in the first presentation and the second presentation, inclusion in the design and functioning and management of public transport spaces, because this industry is actually very central to that. And there are some very good case studies around this, where government has actually sat down with the industry and never, I saw Jackie or somebody posted a question in the chat. You know, I think our biggest fear is always when you look at the vibrancy that the informal transport sector brings to spaces of connectivity, interchanges in transport speak. Often the bureaucrats go away and turn those into complete sterile spaces. You know, so if the informal transport is involved in this, I think you can find a much better balance. So the need for inclusion in planning, regulatory reforms, access to financing, and very specifically, the design of public transport spaces. Now, to my three questions. The first question I have is, and Alana, maybe you in a good position, because a lot of your work focuses on the employee in the industry or the sector. But for me, the first question, and I'm really keen to hear responses to this, where is the seat of power in the informal transport sector as we experience it in these case studies in the cities that we live and work in? And linked to that, and again, I had them one question and then I broke them up. What is the state of consolidation of the informal transport sector in these case studies and in the cities that we live and work in? Because without consolidation, we are not going to be taken seriously. And Jackie, you and I know a lot of the East Africa cases where fragmentation in the sector is used for political expediency purposes, you know. We become the cannon fodder for the next presidential election, that kind of thing, and specifically 2- and 3-wheelers, very susceptible to that. And then my third and final question, Andrea, is how do we establish, and it's maybe a loaded question and I apologize for that, but how do we establish a constructive working relationship? And I'm not going to go stakeholder wide here. I'm going to narrow this down between government, i.e. the authorities at whatever level, and the informal sector. So that's my third question, is because to get out of the rut that we're in, I think there's only one way out, and that is to work towards the establishment of a formal working relationship. Those three questions, hopefully clear. I'm not going to repeat them. And on that note, let me put on my mute and rather participate in the discussion. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Nico, for posing us these questions. And I will actually open up the floor to the rest of the participants. If you have any insights on what Nico threw out there, we have a space now to discuss and to share some insights and yeah, experiences. I don't know if anyone wants to kick off the conversation. Even any of the speakers, since some of the questions were also addressed to the speakers, and then we can continue. Any brave souls?
Andrea, I'm happy to. I couldn't see putting my hand up.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I thought those questions were so interesting, and it was a lot of what I was thinking about as I was listening, in particular to the first presentation. And I think what I wanted to reflect on is, this idea of transport hubs as well, and what that means in terms of how we bring together different groupings within informal workplaces so that they are more effectively organized to represent their interests and have their voices heard. So what I mean by that, in a transport hub, and we've done a lot of this work as the ITF challenge the definition of what it means to be a transport worker. So it's not just the people driving the vehicles, it's all the occupations that surround, the maintenance of the vehicles, the painters, the cleaning of the vehicles, but it's also the traders. It's also the other informal kind of work, which is servicing that kind of hub. But I have to say, in terms of that kind of community of interest or coming together of those different forms of work, there are very few examples of where that is happening effectively. The level of organization is still quite fragmented. And I think that, relates as well to the question about where is the seat of power? It's where is that seat of power, but how do we engage with that seat of power in a way that we're able to, speak in a more powerful way, which requires that level of organization. Okay, I'll leave it at that. I've got a few other comments as well.
Thanks, Alana. Jackie.
Yeah, well, thanks for these amazing presentations and comments. I've just got a few reflections. One is on the fact that when, it seems like government looks at just getting permits as a way to get revenue, and then there is such high unemployment, right, and such high need, you get a lot of folks like, crowding the sector. And that then, as was mentioned in the Mumbai presentation, creates worse conditions for everyone. I think you mentioned, like, then you've got tons of rickshaws in the same place, people waiting, terrible conditions for the workers, and often not great for passengers also. So there seems to be this sort of trade-off around inclusion of more workers, more services, and working conditions. And it seems like it's a little bit of a false trade-off, because what's happening is we're not actually putting public resources into the sector so that we can expand services, improve jobs, and create other jobs that need to be there that aren't around, for example, management and of these places. So I'm just sort of reflecting on this, and yet we seem to never talk about the missing investment, right? And how the government, by seeing these systems as largely places where you can extract revenue rather than as critical services that you can support, sort of creates this problem, right? It's this investment gap and planning gap for the people. And I wonder if we're just in such a neoliberal moment that we're not even articulating it that way, right? So we're kind of letting the government off the hook and kind of looking at, these business models and these problems with the sector. That's one of the reasons I don't like informal transport as a term, because we have to unpack these informalities, including the way the governments often enable them and enable these conditions, so they don't have to invest, quite frankly, in poor people and poor communities. So I guess I'm a little bit frustrated by all of this, but this is where my comment is coming in. And I also wanted to ask the Mumbai team, because we've had, first of all, I love your work. You're an amazing group. And we've had these also really interesting conversations about inclusion around migrants. So people who are considered outside of the city, for example, but they take some of the the worst jobs in this sector. But then they might also be, discriminated against as outsiders when it becomes convenient politically. So I'm wondering if you can also talk about those things. And I also wanted to make a big shout out for a fabulous South African group and Richard Dobson. So this is ASIE in Durban, that's doing a lot of really, really cool work in including traders in Warwick Junction, like this multimodal transport mode. So big shout out to Richard Dobson, and I think we should also make sure we include him at some point in these conversations, and his group in Durban. Great, I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. Okay.
Okay, so we will take some of these questions and respond. So one of the aspects which also, like, we have been looking at is this understanding of the complexities of the migrants who are like in lot in number, who drive the auto rickshaws. Place also of coming from like existing villages who also drive auto rickshaws. So there is always a constant tension between the migrants coming from other states and the locals. That's something we have observed in Nalasopara. That's our experience completely. So there, like even the route distribution, routes are controlled. Some the profitable ones obviously by the locals, and the ones which are like not so profitable, where the waiting times are are controlled by the migrants. And also we have seen one thing, like though we have seen there is lot of waiting time, there is lot of like time before the next you get the next ride. What happens is there are a lot of underserved areas also, like what we saw in our case. There are huge swaths of underserved areas, especially where industrial labor are working. Okay, these are completely underserved. So there is a role of the government, especially to intervene and see how these can be turned into opportunities, because you can actually turn them into opportunities if you create those conditions which are favorable. And for us, like this is coming from our experience, I'm not so our like what we have been doing and what we have been working, because we have been using a grounds up approach, we see an opportunity coming through elected representatives. So that's where we are finding that can be a possible entry point for like what we're talking about, Nico, what you talked about, between the authorities and between the informal sector. There is the elected representatives, because the elected representatives are answerable during especially the votes to these workers, these migrants. They are especially answerable to them. So there is a possible entry point from there. And if we can explain them the benefits, because there's a negative perception, all of them, even the elected representatives have a negative perception. So if we can work to create positive perception about the system, try to make them understand that do not wait for the BRT. You don't require the BRT. Probably there might be a possible change. So that's our experience, and we share our experience. And Jackie, your question also about, I believe the need to include the vendors. Okay, like now we realize that these are sectoral, especially in our context also. These have been like the vendors are not looked at as a part of this ecosystem. We realize that they are a part of this ecosystem. In most stations in Mumbai, you will see how the vendors and the transport like is connected actually, but we see them sectorially. So vendors have a national hawkers policy is there, but talk about space, talk about providing space. But what you require is an integrated plan of the station areas in Mumbai. Let me tell you, the Mumbai station plans ends only with the station. The Mumbai urban transport plans, since it is controlled by the central government and also there are state entities, they only look at the station area. They just don't want to look beyond the station area. But this is something I think we, through our work, we will try to engage with.
Yeah, and just adding on to what Paul said, where like how the power functions between a migrant and a local, where you see when the unions are made also, largely there is like the stronger unions are mostly held by the locals over there, and the migrants don't prefer joining, or there is, but while we did the interviews, we saw like mostly the locals were part of the unions, while the migrant workers didn't see much advantage in being part of the union, or didn't see it helping them in any way. So there was a clear difference in how the management worked because of again having a better union. So yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Ariana?
Yes, hi. First, I wanted to thank all the teams for their presentations and great insights. I just wanted to add a bit like a sort of reflection on something that Nico mentioned on this centrality role of informal transportation, but I think also, as Aniruddha just mentioned now, not only central but integral. I have been doing a lot of reading on informality in general and how transportation, and this relates exactly to this last point of this idea to create a station for the 2 and 3 wheelers that is separated from all the street vending, right? That is this integrality where people go and do their purchases and immediately they jump on their transport. And only normally 2 or 3 wheelers are the ones who are able to access more informal settlements that have these very narrow streets. So this is not only decentrality, but this integrality and transport is a key in connecting these, not only moving people, but maybe even if you are asking the rickshaw driver that you know to bring the groceries for you because you cannot go and do the shopping, right? So I was yesterday in a presentation about on street vending in Monrovia, and they were showing street vending, but also these new indoor spaces that they were creating. And indoor spaces were very empty. They barely had people selling, and the street vending places were full, right? So this is precisely when we think of these policies and how the necessity to have this co-production in the policies, where because otherwise we have, as Nico mentioned, these sterile places that nobody attends, because in the end you have the buses or the rickshaws there, but it's really not connecting and serving the people. So it was just like a reflection on the presentations and your comments, and thank you very much for this meeting.
Thanks, Ariana. Shan, if I'm pronouncing it right, sorry.
Yes, yeah, amazing work, the Mumbai lab. It might be a little bit of a tangent, but I wanted to little talk about another group of workers that is connected to informal transit in my experience. And I see them being impacted by the city I work in, Peshawar, where a bus rapid transit system was introduced 4 years ago. That is of like workers and people who retrofit these vehicles. A lot of them, and specifically in Pakistan, one that is very visible is, I'll post a link in the chat, is of truck artists in Peshawar, in Pakistan. These are people who decorate these informal vehicles, and ever since 2020, when the BRT formal transport was integrated into the Peshawar system, we've seen less and less of this art. So I don't know where these artists are going. There was a report in COVID where they started working on other, like using this art to paint crockery or paint furniture. So a transition for sure, but which is one side, but also the workers that are retrofitting these vehicles, specifically in Pakistan, we have the compressed natural gas. So a lot of the vehicles are retrofitted with fuel mechanisms that are cheaper. And if we are talking about electrification and more sustainable shift, then there is a question of who's gonna benefit from that. Is it the informal employment sector that is already engaged in this, or is it gonna be some other entities? So that was something I was thinking about and want to share.
Thanks so much for sharing that. That's one of the topics we've tried to come in and bring into the conversations, the element of the art and culture and identity around popular transport in so many places. And when we sterilize it and standardize it, a lot of that is lost, and a lot of like the craftsmanship around creating these vehicles and making them different, and yeah, all the elements of art and culture around it is something that I think it's not very much discussed, and I think it should be part of the conversations on how how we can professionalize and modernize, etc., without losing a lot of that essence, and also considering the value that these workers are also adding to the system. So thanks for bringing it up. Abhishek.
Thanks, Andrea. Yeah, I think Shan, thanks for bringing that point up, because I just recently, so in India, just recently came across this. It's not a report, news article, but in the south of India, there's a transport hub, right, where they do the lorry build. The bodybuilding of trucks, right? Like where they build bodies for the trucks. And actually what happened was, when India jumped its norms from BS4 to BS6, which is literally Euro 4 to Euro 6 standards, and there was a massive loss of jobs. 5 to 10,000 already. So there was literally a just transition. We lost multiple jobs, and actually these are people who know the art, who know the vehicles. Actually, they are engineers by heart and not by kind of training or technical kind of education, but like kind of by learning. And they lost their jobs, and actually like a workforce like this could be utilized so much in a much better place, right? Like now they are kind of dispersed and going into different livelihoods where they have no idea, or where they're not experts and need to start again from the bottom of the rung, right? So this was about the south hub, and there's a hub like this in the north as well. And I hear that Pakistani truck art is much better than India as well. It's taking it up a notch. So yeah, thanks for bringing that point up.
Amazing. We have a few more minutes if anyone wants to add some additional comments. Alana.
Yeah, I just wanted to reflect on what people have been saying about the art, the retrofitting. So, you know, that was the finding that we were speaking about the number of different occupations that they are related to informal transport. And yet in the mainstream policy discussions, you only really hear references to the owners or the drivers. So, you know, there's a real invisibilization of the different types of work that constitute informal transport. And it would be really interesting to, you know, to think about maybe through this network, Andrea, at some point, about how we give visibility to those different occupations and what it means for how, you know, planning, regulation, reform should take place. Because if there is any consultation, often when there's a process of formalization, owners are included, or sometimes drivers. Very rarely does the work of the people that we've been talking about now get sort of recognized or brought into any kind of planning. So it would be interesting to think through how we give, you know, visibility to that, and the incredible, you know, knowledge and skills that are kind of based in those different in different occupations. So that's another thing that we've been saying through these labor impact assessments, that the knowledge that workers have who carry out these different types of, you know, economic activity or work is an asset that needs to be drawn upon. They often know where the inefficiencies are, where the problems are, what the root causes are, and how things can be improved. And that's not just owners, it's not just drivers, it's all these different categories of informal transport workers.
Thanks, Alana. Definitely will take the point. And also from some of the things that Nico had mentioned, I wanted to also update you on things that we're doing that align with this. Of course, one of the first things we're doing is always collecting experiences and case studies so that we can share how this is being done in other places. For example, we recently were in Egypt, in Cairo, and we saw the investment part that Nico was saying and the infrastructure that we've been discussing, where a local government established a minibus taxi stop, a 4-story building with infrastructure, with toilets, with signaling technology. And it was full of minibuses and taxis and people, but they also made room for the street vendors that were in the area. So they maintained that close dynamic between those two informal economies, and they're not subsidizing the tariffs or they're not giving money directly to the sector, but they're investing. At the end of the day, investing in a building, in facilities, in infrastructure, in something that will improve the system and will improve the quality of the experience for users and workers alike is really important. And it's a way in which we can start changing these dynamics, but integrating all of these different actors. So I think these types of examples are essential to figure out in which ways we can start bringing closer the government actors and the workers and the sector itself. In terms of the working relationship between the governments and the sector, I think that is one of the things that we want to focus on this year. We've been working with with academia, we've been working with the NGOs, with the international finance entities to try to create the enabling conditions so that when we go talk to governments, we will have the guidance, we will have the data, we will have the money, and the governments will kind of not have another choice to say, okay, maybe we'll do it, right? But we need to develop a lot of tools and insights and enabling conditions so the governments will change the way that they've always done something, because that's the hardest resistance, right? The resistance to change. It's like, why am I going to invest? Why am I going to develop new regulation if this works and I don't have to do much to make it work, right? So the thing that we're doing is trying to right now focus on how we can invest more in the sector and how financial entities, philanthropies, etc., can start helping in this area and thinking about how they need to change their financial offer, their loan structuring, the way that they provide technical assistance, because it's been done for mass transit for a long time. And this is not mass transit. This is different. The operations are different. It's not consolidated, as Nico was saying. So this is like a puzzle, and we need to kind of work on these different pieces. But I think that's why these spaces are so valuable, because different people from different places have different insights on how we can put those pieces together. So continuing these conversations is really essential for me. And on the consolidation, I think the work that you're doing with the unions is really essential, or the research that's being done on the way that these workers organize in different places. But I do think, and I think that's one of the key reflections from this conversation, is that we really need to think more about the workers and what types of workers and make it visible. So I'm going to take that as some homework for myself on how to increase the visibility of what we mean by workers, right? Because it's such a huge diversity of different workers that contribute to this economy of popular transport. Nico, I don't know if you have some final insights based on the discussion that we had. We did not answer all the questions, but I think we're not expected to answer them here. But
okay, wonderful. I was looking for on Zoom where to show my hand, and I couldn't find the button. So thank you very much. Two quick observations in closing, and I don't want to have the last word. I think we have a fascinating case study around consolidation of the informal sector in Kampala, Uganda. I apologize, I was the architect of it 5 years ago, but the process is alive and well and has evolved fantastically. And I do think there's merit in inviting Amanda Ngabirano, the independent chairperson of the Consultative Forum, to one of our discussions to give an overview of the history, the evolution. Now, what's happened there in a nutshell, divide and rule was the name of the game. And Jackie and others who know East Africa know exactly what I'm talking about. So State House, as it's called in Entebbe, when there's problems in the informal transport industry, they would have one-on-one selective discussions. And Alana, I think since the work that was done by GLI in 2020, 2021, and today, it would be fantastic if we can, find the money, the resources to go and do a formal update on this. You now have 6 worker-based or driver-based unions consolidated in the Ugandan Transport Operators Federation, UTOF. And my point here, Andrea, is a consolidated industry is an industry that gets taken seriously by government. You know, a fragmented, individualized industry where everybody's competing for a slice of the pie is not taken seriously. And I think there's a fantastic story on the African continent on that. My final point is perhaps more, maybe slightly controversial, but let me share this. In terms of Alana's presentation, again, I'm reminded of the extreme exploitative nature of the target system, the tenant-landlord model, which is pervasive in the informal transport sector. And my thought was just, we sing the praises of e-hailing systems, etc. I know Uber is funding part of our work, etc. But we must be very careful that we don't replace the owner-driver model with an absent landlord that sits in the form of a tech company. You know, who works for whom? And what's my solution on this? I use Uber a lot, for instance, in my hometown. I think a shift and facilitating the shift towards more owner drivers. Alana, I know there's a much more complex employment relationship, but at the heart of this industry sits the driver. And if we can empower the driver, I think a whole empowerment dynamic can flow from that. Thank you so much for allowing me a little bit of airtime at the end, Andrea. Great discussion. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nico. We're at time, so thanking you all again. Aris, if you want some info on the professionalization with support of the government, the Mexico City case study is amazing. They've done a lot of amazing work on that. You can drop me an email, and we can share you some information on that. But yeah, thanks so much for everyone for attending today. We've lost some of our crowd, but I think it's usually the transport geeks that want to discuss further at the end. And so thanks for all your insights. And it's always really, really enriching to have these conversations and brainstorm and think about new ways and exchange these experiences. So we will be happy to meet again in 2 months. In April, we will be talking about safety and security, which is one of the main topics that everyone asks about when we talk about popular transport. The narrative is that it is dangerous, that people should not use it, but people still use it. So we can think about why people use it and how we can make it safer and improve people's experiences. So we will be sharing the exact date soon when we manage to align all the speakers and the dates. But just so you know, we'll be talking about that in a couple of months. So thanks again for attending, and hope you have nice days, nights, or what time it is where you're at. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you for a wonderful
Thank
session.
you.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone, thanks, Andrea. Bye.